Hi, this is Mark from ITCU Solutions. Today I just want to show you how you can set up on Fortinet SSL VPNs that maintain or get assigned the same static IP address each time that they log into your internal network. This might be important for those people that have access control lists or have other restrictions on their system. And so what we have here is just a little lab setup. I have a laptop that's going to connect in through a router to the external WAN 1 interface of the Fortinet 60D firewall, and I also set up a domain controller or server that we're going to be just accessing and testing to make sure that that static IP stays the same. So the first step in doing this is we're going to change the management port on the FortiGate firewall from 443 to 444. This will allow the clients, the SSL clients themselves, just use the regular internet and not a different port. This will help them get around any firewalls or any things that block non-HTTPS or HTTP ports. So let's go ahead and we'll do that real quickly. So let's get logged in here. So to change that, you just jump over to System and Settings, and right here HTTPS port, we'll just change that to 444. That'll kick me off. And then we'll re-log in on port 444. And that will free up port 443 for our clients. Now the next step is we just need to create users and groups. Technically for what I'm doing, you probably could set this up with just users and not use firewall groups. But if you do that, you have to be very careful and make sure you use the user all the way through. So I'm going to stick with kind of standard good practice and create a group for each user, even though there's only going to be one user in each group. So let's go back over. These are all going to be local users. Call one Bob. And we'll add his user group. Firewall group. Okay. We'll add one more local user, and we'll call him Tom. Okay, so we have our users and groups set up, and now we have to create the source IP pools. Basically, this is the IP pools that we're going to associate with SSL root. So in other words, our SSL VPNs when they log in. This will be the IP address that they see on their side. It won't be the IP address we see internally because we're going to statically NAT that. That's how we're going to give them a permanent static IP. There is another way. There are other ways to do this. You could do this if you had a radius server, like a free radius server or ForAuthenticator or something, and maybe even on the Windows radius. I've never been able to get that part to work, but there are other ways to do this with the special attributes of radius. But this, I think, is a little bit simpler method. So let's get the let's create those source pools for Tom and so we have policy object addresses. Okay, so when Bob logs in, he's going to get one of these two addresses, and it's going to be assigned to SSL VPN tunnel. And I know I said we're going to use static one-to-one NATing. In Fortinet world, that does not necessarily mean that it has to be like Cisco, where it has to be one IP to one IP. They just mean you're not going to be in an overload status, so you're not going to be using like a system interface. So what I'm going to have is a little bit bigger, a small pool here that gets NATed to the same IP address internally. And the reason I'm doing this is if you only have one address here and your user logs in quickly and then gets kicked out and he tries to log in again, if you only have one IP address, you might get something that says something like pool is exhausted, and this will prevent that, because then if the .50 hasn't been released by the firewall yet, they can always pick up 51. Okay, so let's create the next pool. And these addresses don't matter as long as they're private, because they're just what's going to be assigned to the SSL VPN user. Okay, so we got that taken care of. Okay, now we'll set up their portal for each user. And this is basically where we're going to put that source address pool, assign it to the actual VPN portal. Okay. I'm going to disable split tunneling, but if you were going to use split tunneling, you would have had to set up an address before for your internal network. So you would have had an object, a routing address to add here, which you'll see I don't have. I would have to add an internal address for my internal subnet if I want to do that. We'll just skip that for now. Okay, and I'm going to add Tom, and I'm also going to add the SSL VPN tunnel, the default pool in here, and this will be a catch-all for anyone else that logs in that's not Bob or Tom. Okay. So the next thing we're going to do is we're going to configure the actual SSL VPN settings. And this will let us map, not only will it let us configure the standard settings like which interface, which is going to be our external interface we're coming into, and which port, which we freed up 443 earlier by changing our management port. And whether we want to limit who can log in to this, I'm going to allow anyone for this demonstration. What certificate we want to use for this, we're just going to use a built-in certificate, but you could get a real certificate if you'd like. And we're not going to require one for the clients. We are going to assign, specify custom IP ranges, because we want to use Bob, Tom, and again, these are the three pools we already set up. And I'm going to specify a DNS server. Okay, and then the next most important thing is we got to set up our actual mapping here. Okay, so we're going to use Bob. Sorry, I actually want to use his group. And we're going to map the Bob Firewall group to his portal. We'll do the same thing for Tom. Oh, did I forget to create a portal for Tom? My bad. I'm just going to apply this. I'm going to also set a catch-all here, and I'm going to go back and create a which I'll do to full access. This one is just for basically anyone that gets assigned SSL VPN tunnel. This is the catch-all, so they can still log in, but they're not going to be assigned one of our source groups that we created that we're going to statically NAT. So they won't be statically NATed. They'll get overloaded to the actual interface, internal interface. Go back. I did forget to create Tom's portal. Okay, now when I set those up, it was just important that I use the firewall groups because that's what I'm going to be using in my policy objects later on. Otherwise, the client won't be assigned the right pool. He'd get thrown into the SSL VPN tunnel address. If I didn't use, when I associated the group down here, if I didn't use the actual firewall group and I use the user, he'll get associated with this because the portals are associated with the groups. Oops, already did that. Okay, so we got that all set up. Now we have to actually create the policy object pools, which are going to be our what IP addresses we're going to be NATing to for Tom and Bob. So let's go Bob. One-to-one. And you have to pick a address from your internal network on this one. I'm going to pick 52. And again, this is going to take the address we created here and NAT it to this address as it comes through into the internal interface inside our network. And we'll do Tom. Let's see. We'll just use the next IP in line. Okay. So now we have the addresses we can statically NAT to. So the last thing we have to do is just create our firewall rules. I will call this one Bob internal. Okay, so we're going to come in through the tunnel interface to our internal network. And we want to use Bob's address, Bob's group. And I'm going to say all. We could create one and call it internal, but it doesn't matter for this. And then this is where we're going to statically NAT it. Use dynamic IP pool. This would be, you'd use the outgoing interface address if you wanted to overload the port, which is what our default catch-all will do. I'll create one for Tom. Okay. Internal. And we need his user group as well. And we'll hit all. Eval from user Tom. Okay. All right. Well, let me change one thing here. It's giving me an error. I'm not sure why. So let's just go change our. Go back to our portal. Since we're using full access here, and we're going to disable split tunneling. Okay. Okay. Get Tom here. Tom group. All. Okay. Oh, sorry, I forgot to. You can see here I forgot to add his static net. Okay. So we got our internal policies. Because I'm not using split tunneling, I'm also going to create a policy for my internet traffic. So we'll just call, say, SSL VPN. This time we're going to go out the WAN interface. I'll include both Bob and Tom in that. Oops. Destination all. We'll just do. Okay. I'm just allowing everything out for these guys when they log in. But we don't need to use a dynamic IP pool here. We're just gonna let it NAT to the WAN IP address, WAN interface IP address. Okay, so we have our rules. You can see that was our last step. So let's give this a quick test. Oops, wrong. So I'm just going to log in. I have a Fortinet client already set up for connection name Bob. I'll show you how I set that up. You can call this anything. We can call this generic connection. I'm actually use this for both Bob and Tom. But I just have my remote gateway set up, of course, is the WAN 1 interface of the Fortinet, my external interface, and you just have to have your port, which in this case is defaults to 443. And I also told don't warn me if I have an invalid server certificate and no client certificate. Okay, so log in as Bob here. Okay, we're starting off good. Bob got his own IP pool. We set it to 10.102.50 or 51, so that's a good sign. So now we're going to go see if we got the his internal IP is changing to the 10.2.2.52, which is what we're assigning to him through static NAT. So let's jump over to the server. Oops, actually, let's do this. Let's start a constant ping, so we have some traffic to the server that's easily identifiable. And so let's go over your capture. Okay. Sorry, I forgot. Got the wrong. So we had no traffic there because it's set for 54 instead of 52. Okay. So I just changed my host. And you can already see once I put in 52, we're getting our ping requests here. We're getting a bunch of other traffic. Oops, should have just hit restart. So you can still see the ping requests coming in. Now just to prove that this is Bob, I'm going to go change Bob's IP from 52 on the Fortinet to 54. So if we just go back over to his IP pool, and if we went and edited Bob, and we changed him to 54. Okay. Okay, so you should see a brief interruption on the client right there. Now he should be picking up his 54 now. So let's go back over to the server. And okay, so we don't see anything going on in 10.2.2.52. I thought we might still see some ARP requests from the server. So nothing's happening anymore, so Bob's gone. So if now we change it back, if we change our filter to 54, we should start seeing those pings again. And we do. So the traffic came back, and so you can see Bob's address is being controlled by whatever we're statically natting. Let's just go log in with Tom real quick. Also, I'm just going to check one other thing here to see if my external rule is working. Yeah, and this is also shows you my I can ping Google, so this is showing the external rule I set works to get out through the Fortinet as well. So let's try Tom. Whoops. Okay, I apparently screwed up somewhere. Here in Tom, we're getting the default IP pool, which probably means as I was blabbing about how you have to use the group, I probably used his name somewhere. So let's disconnect and go back to the firewall. I probably screwed it up in the portal. Let's see here. And that's probably why I was getting that error. It wouldn't let me use all on Tom's address. So let's go back to his portal. I probably, not the portal, but to VPN settings to where I mapped him. Okay, and I did. So you got to be careful. If you use the Tom group everywhere and then you try to use the Tom user to map, it's not going to be mapped to anything else we've set up in the steps along the way. So it doesn't actually, the IP pool isn't associated with Tom, it's associated with our group. the group Tom group instead of Tom. And so you just got to be careful when you do that. You got to make sure you use the same object all the way through, because he was using the catch-all, this full access down here. That's why he was getting that other IP address. So if we go back now, I'm still getting it, so I got somewhere else wrong. Oh, I forgot to apply it. Okay, so now you can see Tom's pulling his own IP address, and then we were statically netting him to 53. So if we do the same thing, go over here, oh shoot. And you'll see the echo requests, and that's Tom. So you can see both of these work, and it's a pretty good solution. It works pretty well. Just make sure that whatever you use it consistently all the way through to make sure that those groups get the correct source IP addresses so they can be converted to the correct static net. I hope this was helpful, and if you have any questions, let me know. Thanks.